Texas Public Policy Foundation has played an active role in advancing policies to improve the Texas child welfare system. This work has proven successful at reducing the number of children in the Texas foster care system, improving child safety, and protecting families against unnecessary government intervention. But we realize that our efforts in this area, while important, we're only touching a specific subset of Texas families. So in true TPBF fashion, we started thinking bigger. Starting from our belief that strong, healthy families make a strong, healthy Texas, we developed a policy agenda that would not only impact all Texas families, but also make Texas the best place to start and raise a family. The research paper that we are launching today, which we conducted in joint with the Institute for Family Studies, with Mr. Brad Wilcox up here, this research paper forms the foundation of this new area of focus at the foundation, and we are so excited to share it with you. I hope you all grabbed a copy out in the lobby. Take a look at that. We had the great privilege of partnering, like I said, with IFS, who is the premier national research institute focused on strengthening marriage and family life, on producing a groundbreaking analysis of the state of marriage and families in the Lone Star State. So this afternoon, I have the great joy of being joined by several leaders in both research and policymaking to discuss our findings and cast a vision for how the Texas legislature can advance the institution of the family over the next decade. So starting off in the middle here with Senator Mays Middleton, represents Texas Senate District 11, which encompasses portions of Brazoria, Galveston, and Harris counties. Prior to being elected to the Senate, Senator Middleton served 2 terms in the State House of Representatives, and he is consistently ranked among the most conservative members of the legislature. He serves as the vice chairman of the subcommittee on higher ed and a member of the committees on administration, business and commerce, education, and jurisprudence, and state affairs, so you're not too busy. Senator Mays and his wife Macy are proud parents of 4 children. That's Connor, Christian, Matthew, and Martha Ann. So he has deep experience with the subject we are discussing today. To my left, Dr. Brad Wilcox is professor of sociology and director of the National Marriage Project at the University of Virginia. A leading scholar in marriage and family formation, Dr. Wilcox also serves as the Future of Freedom Fellow at the Institute for Family Studies and a non-resident senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. His new book, right here, which you will all receive copies of today, outside after our event, is called Get Married. Why Americans should defy the elites, forge strong families, and save civilization. That's a great title. His work has been published in numerous scientific journals, the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, The Atlantic, and National Review. And as co-author of the paper we are launching today, he can now add published by the Texas Public Policy Foundation to his impressive list of accolades. Brad and his wife live in Charlottesville, Virginia, where they are going above and beyond to strengthen family life in the U.S. by raising, guys, 9 children. And last but not least, on the left of our panel is Andrew Brown, who serves as the vice president of the Texas Public Policy Foundation. In addition to supporting all of the foundation's policy campaigns, he has dedicated his career to serving vulnerable children and representing and strengthening families through community-driven, liberty-minded solutions. As an attorney, Andrew has represented children in the foster care system, advocated for the rights of parents against government intrusion, and helped build families through domestic and international adoption. He earned his BA in Poli-Sci from Baylor and his law degree from SMU. Andrew and his wife, Jen, are the parents of 2 boys, Cash and Boyd. Guys, can you please join me in welcoming our panelists? Thank you so much. Dr. Wilcox, I'm going to start out with you. You have been studying marriage and family for 15 years, I think. Can you set the stage for us, please? Tell us about some of the larger nationwide trends you've been seeing in marriage and family formation and why it's important for policymakers to be paying attention to these trends.
Yeah, thanks, Carolyn. It's wonderful to be here at TPBF today. I'm so happy for your leadership in this important domain, this important endeavor. So, Andrew, thanks for leading out here. And Senator, thanks for being with us here today, too, on this family set of issues this afternoon. So in terms of kind of the big picture, I've gotten both bad news, Carolina, and good news to report about kind of marriage and family in America. And I think the bad news is that we're kind of seeing what I call a closing of the American heart. Again, a closing of the American heart kind of unfolding in this country where both, dating and marriage and childbearing are coming down across this country. We've seen, the marriage rate come down by 60%, since 1970 in the U.S., for instance. And that's really the bad news. Now, the good news is the folks who are kind of getting married today, who are kind of forming families today, I think are doing it often in a more intentional way. And we have seen divorce come down in the United States in recent years. And what that means kind of practically and concretely is that we're seeing, since about 2012, a slight uptick in the share of kids who are being raised in stably married parent families. So that's, I think, the good news is that, we are seeing at least some Americans kind of approaching this whole family formation, issue in ways that are good for them and good for their children. Now, when kind of turning, our thoughts to Texas, what we see is that these trends are kind of also being reflected in Texas trends. Our report talks about, a decline in marriage in Texas by more than 40% since 1990 in terms of the marriage rate in Texas. Also a decline in fertility. But it's important to note some positive points about the Texas pattern. That is that your fertility rate's a little bit higher than the national average, about 1.8. And the national average is 1.6. So both below replacement, but Texas fertility is higher than America as a whole. And then when it comes to family stability for kids across Texas, we're seeing that you're a little bit higher too in the report. So about 54% of Texas teens are kind of being raised by stably married parents, and that's a little bit higher than we see in the country as a whole. So that's I think kind of good news for Texas. And then all this matters because what we see is that both actually kids and also adults are more likely to flourish when they have the benefit of being raised by married parents or being part of a married family themselves. And we can see, in this report, I'm sure we'll come back to it, but there are just numerous outcomes in education, in violence, in poverty, where kids in Texas are doing a lot better when they're being raised by married parent families. And then we're seeing across the country that things like deaths of despair and kind of trends in happiness are closely connected to the fortunes of the American family. So I've been teaching and kind of living under the shadow of Thomas Jefferson, literally in Charlottesville for 20 years now. And he's known for a lot of things, including the Declaration, talking about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And on both the life front and the pursuit of happiness front, we have new evidence from Jonathan Rothwell Brookings and then from a new piece of work at Chicago, kind of just connecting the fortunes of marriage to both deaths of despair. And then this new research in Chicago is telling us that kind of the number one factor that helps to account for why fewer Americans are saying they're happy is the fact that fewer Americans are married. So all the things we're talking about today are pretty, I think, important in kind of sustaining this American experiment that we're all engaged in.
That's awesome. Thank you. Senator, we like to say at the foundation, and I think you would agree with this, that our goal is to make Texas the freest and best place in the world to live, work, and raise a family. Can you tell us about what makes Texas the best state to lead this national effort toward revitalizing marriage and family life, and kind of your reaction to some of these observations from Dr. Wilcox?
Well, so, family is actually one of the things that really called me, I guess that's the right word to say, to run for office, where Macy and I are blessed with 4 kids, and at the time that I first ran, we just had 2, and we're about to have our 3rd at the time. But, it's one of those things where we need to leave it better than we found it, first of all, but we're also worried about their future, right? I know we all are worried about the future that our children and grandchildren are going to grow up in, because we don't have another Texas to move to, right? And we do have something called Texas exceptionalism, right? We actually fought for our independence, unlike some of the other states. It wasn't something granted by Congress. We earned it, in the Battle of San Jacinto in 1836. And the things that they were fighting for, of course, were our God-granted freedoms, right? Life, liberty, property. And we want to make sure that the next generation of Texans gets to experience those freedoms. And they don't get to if someone's not going to fight for it, right? These things don't happen automatically. Somebody's got to make sure that they're protected and defended. And that's what we swear into office. You're supposed to protect and defend the laws and the Constitution of the state of Texas and the United States. We mean it, when we take that oath. And a lot of that is the next generation, because we don't have a future without our kids. There is no future without our children. And, I know our 4 little ones that Macy and I have, that's our daily reminder of what we're fighting for. I'm the only one with that many young children in the Senate, and I think it's really important to have people elected office that, have young families, because, man, there's no more daily and visceral reminder of how important this fight is and how important it is that we win it, than seeing little kids at home, and realizing the decisions we make are going to impact them and their future, and we want to make sure they get to experience the God-granted freedoms that have made Texas that exceptional state that it is.
Wow, that's beautiful. Thank you for that. Andrew, the senator talking about kind of our God-given rights is making me think about the philosophical underpinnings of this. And I'm wondering if you can tell us about what you see the role of family in a civilization that values liberty, and why is the foundation engaging on this issue now?
The family is the fundamental unit of society. And I like to start any conversation about why is a conservative limited government think tank getting into family policy by saying it's the one institution that doesn't need government permission to exist. In fact, you don't have a state, you don't have a government unless you have families, right? You think about the organization of society, it's families start, groups of families form communities together, and eventually they grow large enough to where they need to have some type of way of organizing their society, and that's when you get these governmental and state structures coming about, right? So you don't have a state, you don't have a nation unless you have groups of families, and the health of that nation is inextricably tied to the health of those families. And as families weaken, as they break up, as they fail to even launch, you start seeing those cracks in the foundation start spreading up through the structure of society, and eventually that society, if that deterioration continues, will collapse. And so we really view this work at the foundation as essential to ensuring that all of these things that make Texas great are maintained in the future. And we can't maintain the greatness of Texas without investing time and focus on ensuring that Texas families are as strong as they possibly can be, and that we have that solid foundation from which to build upon.
Thank you. Dr. Wilcox, something I found interesting in your work is the idea of family first contrasted to the idea of children first. Can you tell us a little bit about this distinction and how it might inform our thinking about families as well as kind of family policy?
Yeah, that's a great question, Caroline. I think sometimes when you're kind of working in this space, both in the academy and in the media and the public policy world, there's this kind of this idea that kind of kids are just sort of out there and they're just kind of like, without parents and without families surrounding them. And that's, I think, a mistake because kids are much more likely, we know, to flourish when they have the benefit of 2 parents who are there for them and with them, and who are engaged in their lives and, ideally married to one another. So I think a family first policy agenda kind of understands and appreciates there's a kind of ecology that's best for our kids. We want to kind of do more to promote that family-based ecology. And in this new report, we were talking about strengthening and stabilizing marriage. We're also talking to you about making kind of childbearing and child rearing more affordable for families across Texas. We're talking to you about trying to figure out ways to increase the quality of family relationships, and to reduce the risk of domestic violence in homes across the state. And then to maximize both the time and the authority that parents have when it comes to rearing the next generation, kind of recognizing that there's no other party out there, especially not the state, that is sort of, better equipped to kind of care for kids and understand sort of what's, in their their long-term interest.
That's awesome. Thank you. Senator Middleton, you're a father, as you mentioned, of 4. I think that's 3 boys and a girl. So speaking from your experience raising sons, can you tell us why it's important that the unique needs of challenges of men and boys are part of a family first agenda?
Well, we're seeing where just the idea and of a family unit is under attack right now. I mean, whether that's inflation, right? Bidenflation from Washington, D.C., where families can no longer afford to buy a home, and because of the cost of living has gone up so much, that's an obstacle to having kids or more kids, or even just outright attacks where, like what you saw where it was, I guess, a couple of years ago now, where they tried to work with the Biden administration to investigate concerned parents, moms and dads, going to school board meetings and have them investigate under the Patriot Act and label them domestic terrorists. I mean, so how does that really encourage families, when people read that in the news? I mean, so the family unit is definitely under attack, and we need to do more. Like, the school choice program is incredibly important to that, because that's saying, look, the ultimate decider, the final say in a child's education should be parents and not the government, right? So we're saying we trust you as a mom or a dad, decide what's best for your child. And then also, I've worked with Andrew before on CPS reform, where it used to be, it didn't have to be an imminent threat of harm to a child, where they could remove and break up a family, and should always only be an emergency if a family's going to be broken up, right? So we have had a lot of CPS reform as well here in the state of Texas, where, it was a lot of low-income families too, unfortunately, where they were not able to defend themselves. And we worked with Texas Homeschool Coalition to provide that defense, where they got to keep, their child, where it wasn't removed in a case that was really ridiculous, honestly. Of course, the laws are there to protect children from harm. We need to continue to do that, but they were definitely abused to break up families. And then also on the adoption side as well, that's another part of the pro-life movement, right? I mean, to be pro-family means you're also pro-life, right? This is one of our most precious gift from God as children. And so that's a big priority as well of mine, is making it easier to adopt. And not only that, easier for low-income families, because it's very expensive, it's very time-consuming. That's a burden a lot of times. And, there is a time value of money here, where they're having to take a lot of days off work to work with investigators, lawyers, doctors, everyone involved in this process of adopting children, whether that's out of foster care or private placement. But we need to do more to encourage that. So I would like to see, and I've worked with Representative Schatzline on this as well, a grant program for low-income families to cover those adoption-related costs, to encourage. This encourages families, right? Encourages them to have more children through adoption. So those are some of the things I'd like to see in Texas. And Texas has always led the way on family values, and we're going to continue to do so. And unfortunately, right now, it's in the face of a hostile federal government, right? So obviously, their policies are almost designed to break up families, frankly, at the end of the day. So it is up to us at the state level, and that's why, this is a federalist system where federal government is a creation of the states, not the other way around. So yes, we don't need to ask permission from them to do these things. We need to do it. That's what states' rights are. So.
Yeah. Thank you. Andrew, from a policy perspective, incentivizing Texans to choose to marry and raise children is a bit tricky, since this is an area that involves complex personal, cultural, and social factors. Can you tell us about how TPBF is approaching this issue from a limited government perspective?
Yeah, and as you said, there's a lot of factors that go into the decisions that individuals and couples make on, are we going to get married? Are we going to have kids? When are we going to have kids? How many kids are we going to have? And the trick from a policy perspective is trying to figure out what are the levers that are available to policymakers that can help incentivize these decisions that we know are good for individuals, good for families, and good for society as a whole. I often think about this idea that, there's not a whole big long list of things that government can do to get people to get married and raise kids, but there's a whole lot of things government can do to dissuade people from getting married and having kids. And so one of the focuses of this research that we're launching today, in partnership with the Institute for Family Studies, is to really find that foundation. There's a lot of charts, there's a lot of data in this paper. And what we were trying to do was really conceptualize, where are we now? Why are things the way that they are in Texas in terms of the health of our marriages and families? And then from that foundation, you build a policy agenda on top of it, because you're able to identify the pain points. And through various surveys with individuals, especially the rising generation who are coming into that prime marrying and child-rearing age, you're smiling because that's you. You find that they will cite things like economics. Things are really expensive right now. We can't afford to have a home. But you also find self-actualization reasons. They want to travel. They want to focus on their careers. They just want time to do things that they want to do. So some of these things are easier to address, the economic and the cost of living things. That's something that, okay, there's a very clear policy avenue for that. But things like individual perception of what it takes to raise a family, the things that they have to sacrifice, and the willingness to sacrifice, short-term pleasures for a long-term gain, things that are better in the long term. That's cultural. That's education. That's getting into the communities, getting into the schools, and helping young people realize that getting married and having a family is not just good for you in the short term. It's good for you in the long term. It's good for your kids, and it's good for society as a whole, and you will be much happier. And that's one of the things that Dr. Wilcox's research, I think, really drives home for me, is you will be happier. The data shows that you have a better chance at happiness and prosperity if you really commit to raising a family and investing time, money, energy, your heart, your soul into that pursuit. It may feel like a lot, and my boys are 6 and 4. It's a lot of work. But it's also the best thing that you can do. Like, the amount of joy you derive from raising these little humans and wrestling with the kids, taking the boys on adventures, the ridiculous, silly things that they talk about. Like, it's a lot of fun, too. I don't sleep much. I was joking with Caroline before we came in here that we've had some sickness going through the house. And I was like, I just am ready for this whole week of events to be done so I can go sleep. And she's like, don't fall asleep during the panel. I said, I might. But, it's happiness that ultimately comes out of it. And you realize that these things that you're doing that seem small and insignificant and are only impacting, your little tribe, are actually having a much broader impact in your neighborhood and your community and for the state as a whole.
That's awesome. Thank you, Andrew. Dr. Wilcox, kind of building off what Andrew's talking about here with education and how to kind of shift this cultural perception that marriage makes you miserable. Can you tell us a little bit about the success sequence, which is one of the things we talk about in this paper, what that is and why we think it's important for kids to learn?
Yeah, no, great question. I just want to kind of also just bookmark Andrew's comments, because we're kind of getting a lot of voices now in the culture today. We're kind of telling our younger adults, both actually our women and our men, different camps, different reasons, that marriage is kind of, and parenthood is a path to misery. I'm thinking of, obviously, of Andrew Tate now, a new figure on the right, who's telling guys to kind of steer clear of marriage and just get strong and make a lot of money and to use but not invest in the opposite sex. And that's a newer thing on the part of the right. And then on the left, we've had kind of this message for a long time, including from a New York Times writer not too long ago saying that married mother in America is a game no one wins. So again, like a lot of our young adults, including our teenagers, are kind of getting this false message about marriage and family that makes them think it's just all kind of stress and sacrifice and suffering. And they're not getting kind of the truth, which is that there are no kind of group of Americans that are more likely to be saying things like, I'm not lonely, that my life is meaningful, and that I'm happy, than both married fathers today and also married mothers today. And so we kind of need to get that message out to the public. And one way, and part, I think, to do that is to kind of teach our kids about the success sequence. And that's this idea that there are kind of 3 steps that young adults can take that will maximize their odds of financial security, but also, it turns out, kind of their emotional well-being too. And those steps are at least getting a high school degree on the education front, and then having some experience working full-time, in your 20s, and then getting married before having kids, putting the marriage before the baby carriage is kind of the thought there. So again, the idea here, and this is not rocket science, but there's still obviously a lot of folks out there in our culture today, including our teenagers and young adults, who don't always appreciate how much education, especially work, and even more so marriage, are still very much kind of pillars of the American dream. So concretely, we see, for instance, that 97% of young adults who follow these 3 steps are not poor in their late 20s and their 30s. 86% of them reach the middle class or higher if they've kind of taken these 3 steps. And then we've got a new report from my colleague, Dr. Wendy Wang, I think it's for Family Studies, and Sam Wilkinson at Yale, telling us that young adults today who are following these 3 steps are 50% less likely to be emotionally distressed than their young adult peers who are not following these steps. So it's just kind of getting out this idea to our kids and young adults that there are ways to kind of move into adulthood successfully, and that we should be teaching them in the state of Texas, either through some kind of family life approach, or some kind of financial literacy kind of approach, in high schools across the Lone Star State.
Very cool. Well, Senator, staying on the topic of education, I know that you have been a leading champion of school choice, and you kind of talked about this earlier with parents having the right to raise your own children. But can you dig into that a little bit more and talk about what makes education so important for parental empowerment?
So, we're a country and a state built on equality of opportunity, right? That's what we're founded on. It's not outcome, right? Equality of outcome is socialist destruction. And, parents have to know, and this is one of the ways that government's frankly gotten in the way of families, is that's being destroyed. You see a lot of talk about equality of outcome, where they're forcing things like, Title IX's a good example, where they were trying to get boys to unfairly compete against girls, steal opportunity from our daughters, steal opportunity from women. That's what, that's their plan. It's passed the Save Women Sports Act to help combat that. We need to do a lot more. You saw the radical Title IX agenda that was just being pushed. Literally, if you're thinking about having kids and you see in the news that they just tried to propose a rule, which was fortunately stopped, our Attorney General and several others stopped it, where you could be held liable as a kindergarten teacher if you use the wrong pronoun for child. How about that? That's the kind of ridiculous stuff that you're seeing, and it's also a symptom of the war, really, to take God out of government. That's what they've been trying to do for many years. And fortunately, we now have a lot of Supreme Court precedent, so a lot of tailwinds here to turn that around. So prayer in public school has been a big priority of mine, putting prayer back in our public school system. But then also, we got to provide other opportunities for families where our public school system doesn't work for them, right? It's every child is unique, every child is different. They all learn in different ways, and homeschooling, private schooling, charter schools, these are options that we need to make available to every parent, because every parent should be treated equally. And at the end of the day, all this is it is trusting moms and dads. We're saying, look, we trust you to make these decisions for your children. And I think when you have these opportunities available to parents, it's going to encourage people to get married and have kids, right? I mean, it's like we've got these tools where we do have that equality of opportunity, right? And school choice is really one of the great equalizers here. It's one of the biggest undone things that we've got in Texas. Unfortunately, there are a lot of states that have passed us by on that. I think we're going to fix that next session, God willing. Got a lot more votes. I see one over here, Helen Kerwin. There's another vote for school choice right there, sitting here with us today. But look, at the end of the day, what that does is education allows people the tools, teaches them the tools to go out there and make a living, provide for their family, get a job, own a home. I mean, that's the American and the Texas dream, and government has gotten in the way of that a lot of the time, frankly. And we've also gotten away from some career-based tools that we need to prioritize more, the outcomes. That's what we need to prioritize, the outcomes. School choice does that. We need to do more of that in higher ed. Our community colleges are a great example of doing that. But at the end of the day, that's what's going to encourage more families, right? So they know that their child will have that opportunity, and they'll get to choose, and they get a say, and they're not going to be labeled a domestic terrorist and run out of a school board meeting, right? Because that's kind of one of the issues too right now, is you also hear where, say, you go and you don't like what's in the library, right? There's something inappropriate in the library, and that's unfortunately the case a lot more often than we ever realized. Well, so now you could, if they don't do anything about it and leave it there, what do you do, right? I guess you could vote out the school board. How's a single mom or, a young married couple that, can barely make ends meet, going to take time off work to do that? They can't. But what if they could say, you know what? I'm going to take the money, and it's going to follow my child to somewhere that represents my values, because it's values-based too, right? We see that again and again, where a lot of families are choosing the type of education based on values, right? And it will allow that decision now for families that don't have that choice because they can't afford it. So it's empowering parents. That's the goal here.
Andrew, shifting topics a little bit to economics, you mentioned earlier briefly that economical factors are something that impacts marriage and family formation a lot. Can you talk about what some of those are and how the legislature might go about addressing that?
And before I do that, I'm going to do the thing that, as a moderator, we never want to have happen to us, but now I'm on this side of the microphone and I get to do it to you. I want to go back to what Senator Middleton was saying and really emphasize the important principles that he's hitting on, especially with this idea of school choice. Is it really goes back to this idea that we discuss in the paper, that it is parents who are responsible for the care and upbringing of their children. This is a fundamental constitutional right. It's something that the government does not bestow upon parents. They have it inherently, and children have a fundamental right to have a relationship with their parents and to be raised by their parents. And that's why I think school choice is such a critical piece of this broader puzzle of restoring the fundamental rights of families to live free and to raise their children, to organize their lives free from that government micromanaging interference. It's why the left is so terrified of school choice, because it's coming back to this idea that it is the parents who are the ones who are responsible for educating their children, for raising their children. One of the worst things that any politician can say for me, and it just grates on my nerves every time I hear it, and we hear it a lot right now because we're in the thick of campaign season, is our kids. No, it's not our kids. It's the parents' kids. The government has no role in raising these children. There's a very limited role of the government, like Senator Middleton said, to protect kids from harm. But the authority lies with the parents. And that's really what a pro-family policy agenda gets back to, is ensuring that that authority is not just protected, but viewed as essential for the healthy functioning of a society. So now I'll get back to the question that you asked me. The economics are complex. we talk a lot in this paper about housing because that's one of the big issues that continues to come up in the data of why people are delaying marriage, delaying having kids, because they can't afford a home or what they would view as a safe or appropriate place to raise their kids. And in Texas, we've been fortunate that we've had a pretty good housing market in comparison to the rest of the country. But folks who live in Austin know all too well, it's becoming increasingly expensive, due in large part to cities and counties driving up the cost of living through property taxes. I was reading an article this morning about the new tax rate that Travis County has just approved. That is, they maxed it out. They went as high as they were allowed to go under the law. And the news was interviewing hopefully voters who are really, really mad about it because it's becoming increasingly difficult to own a home and to maintain a comfortable living environment to raise families in this county, in this city, and all across the country. And so that's something that I know that the legislature, especially you, Senator Middleton, have been laser focused on trying to push back against these rogue local governments who are trying to take more and more money out of the pockets of Texas families and use it for just absurd projects and little pet projects across the state. But we also need to look at, what is driving the cost of living. The cost of groceries is going up. Inflation right now is still hitting people incredibly hard. The cost of basic needs and the cost of basic necessities, all of that needs to be addressed, and it's something that the state can address through various means. And a lot of it is just getting government out of the way and allowing the market to work. I don't like to say this is free market magic. There's a part of that. But we have to be thoughtful and targeted in the relief that we provide. One of the recommendations that we make in the paper, in addition to continuing the property tax relief and moving toward getting rid of the school district ISD's M&O taxes, which is a major driver of folks' property tax bills, but also to consider how can we provide targeted relief for married couples and for families raising children, recognizing that this is an important project. It's an important work of our society for people to get married and have kids, and it's an expensive thing that people are engaging in. So how can the state, as they're looking at the property tax relief project, really make sure that families are front and center in the relief that's provided to Texans across the board?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Senator, I know Andrew just gave you a shout out here. Can you say a little bit about this economic work that you've done, what we've accomplished, what you're hoping to do in the next legislature on kind of economic issues?
I mean, the home ownership affordability issue, that is a huge barrier to what we've seen in people not getting married, not starting families. A lot are still living with their parents because the cost is so high. I mean, property taxes are rent to the government for your own home. I mean, it's what it is, right? I mean, you say you don't even have a mortgage, you don't pay your taxes, what happens? Someone will come and take it with a badge and a gun, right? And that has unfortunately risen a lot, and we've seen a lot of local government that doesn't seem to see it as your money. They think it's theirs, right? Where they're raising revenue. I'm like, there is no revenue. This is how much you take from other people, right? Where it's a choice. And with the taxes rising as much as they are, and the values as well, that's part of it. It's a two-part equation. Don't forget, value times rate. Young couples can't afford to own a home anymore. And if they know they can't afford to own a home, they're probably not going to have a family. And then also the other part of that is right now, school choice is only for the wealthy. So a lot of that is, the cost of homes in the good school districts, the best school districts, right? So if we have school choice, we're not going to be constrained by that anymore, where it's basically skyrocketed the values in the, A, ISD areas. And if you've got a way to choose which school you go to, you don't have to live in that geographic location, right? You don't have to be bounded by that, So I think that will also help with the affordability issue where they can take the money wherever they want. It's not just a product of where they live. So that's going to help young couples as well. And then, I mean, you layer that on top of the interest rates too. I mean, you know, mortgage rates are incredibly high right now, and that's, of course, bad, terrible federal policy where they've, you know, printed trillions of dollars. Thank God we can't print money in Texas, and thank God we can't take on debt like that in Texas. Should be grateful our founders put that in the Constitution every day. And then all the other things with cost of living increases as well. Families, they just can't afford to have kids by and large. So what that means is that, yes, the government is one of the biggest obstacles to it, right? And that's something that we can do something about. And property tax relief has always been a huge priority mine because it's refunding your money to you, right? I mean, that's not the state's money, that's your money, you know. And I think we have about $20 billion in surplus right now. Maybe we can add more to that because, you know, the states had to do the federal government's job for it on border security. Well, I'd like a refund. And I think that refund should go to you, the taxpayer. So that'd be about another $12 billion, $13 billion we spent so far on that. A whole lot more if it keeps going the trajectory that it's at. So these are the things that we can do to encourage families, you know, and make it easier and more affordable to buy a home and provide for your family. I mean, that's, at the end of the day, that's the cornerstone of this. So thank you for your comments.
No, thank you. Dr. Wilcox, data and kind of having accurate data about these issues plays an important role in the development of effective family-first policy. Many of the recommendations made in our paper focus on ensuring that the state has the best data possible on the health of marriage and families. How will this help strengthen Texas families? Tell us a little bit more about that. Or show us some data.
Yeah, let's see here. Trying to get the data going here a little bit. So it's just important to note a couple of different points here on the data that we already kind of know from this report and other work that's been done lately. And before I begin this quick, slide deck, just to underline that there are some negative things happening in Texas in terms of family life, but it is important also to highlight one other kind of fact is that you are the #1 destination right now in America for families with kids in terms of the most migration we're seeing across this country right now in terms of folks who are, picking up stakes and moving to a different state with kids in America is the destination is Texas. So you kind of take some pride in that. But it's also important, I think, for people to realize that there are some, key dynamics playing out in Texas families, and we kind of underline those dynamics in this new report. We show, for instance, on this slide up on the screen here, that 54% of Texas kids are kind of going through their childhood with a stable married parent family, in their life, and that's important, as we'll see kind of in the next slides here as well, for a whole array of outcomes that we underline in this new report, including on the education front. What we can see here is that kids who are being raised by their own married parent families are markedly less likely to be having reports from school teachers, principals, whatnot, about behavioral and learning problems, as the slide here tells us. And then we're also seeing, too, across the state in this new report with TPPF that child poverty is markedly lower for kids here who are being raised in married families versus kids being raised in single mother households. So it's kind of just clearly the case from this report that there's a strong link between kids flourishing in Texas and having the benefit of married parents. And so kind of given that work we've done for this report, it'd be great for state agencies, from the Texas Education Agency to the Texas Department of Criminal Justice to kind of begin to report out kind of outcomes and trends and patterns that they're seeing, for kids and then also for adults in the state by family structure. So it'd be nice, for instance, to have the Texas Education Agency kind of reporting out how kids are doing in Texas districts, not just by race and ethnicity or by economic disadvantage as they do right now, but also by family structure. And the benefit is that kind of gives policymakers like the senator, it gives teachers, it gives journalists, it gives policy analysts, parents a sense of sort of how much things like race and things like ethnicity and things like money, but as well as things like family, matter for the capacity of kids and adults to flourish here in Texas.
That's great, thank you. As we close up here, Andrew and Senator Middleton, can y'all provide us with any closing policies that we haven't talked about yet that you think are really important for creating family first policy in Texas?
Well, I mean, one of the things that we hadn't mentioned yet is public safety, right? I mean, if you don't feel safe, you're probably not going to, have kids. I mean, we're worried about the environment they're going to grow up in, and these children are safe, and so at the end of the day, we talk about life, liberty, and property a lot, but I mean, if we can't have those freedoms, those God-granted freedoms, if we don't have public safety, right? Because someone could take your life, someone could take your liberty, and someone could take your property. So that's a really important component of it, making sure that the penal code and all the things that are there to keep us safe and our kids safe, that it's not cafeteria style, that we don't have district attorneys that are, enforcing certain provisions of it, not others. I mean, we saw here, in Travis County, the county attorney said they're not going to prosecute anyone for criminal trespass, right? Well, how's that keeping families safe? And also, interestingly enough, enrollment is declining a lot in Austin ISD. Now, could those two be linked? I think so. So this is an example of it. There's no one single solution, and there's no one single thing to promote family. It all goes together, right? And public safety is a huge component of that. And I joke the safest place for take your kids to go play around here is the Capitol, because it's DPS that guards it, right? So if you want to be safe, go there. But we laugh, but it's sad, and we see around downtown Austin the homeless issue, and kids getting hassled, drugs. This is not the kind of thing that encourages people to have kids, right? In fact, it does the opposite. So I think that's something that we need to keep in mind, not just from keeping adults safe, but also promotes families as well.
Thank you.
The education piece is the part that I keep coming back to. Two of the recommendations in the paper, one is to have a statewide public service campaign around educating Texans about the importance of marriage and having and raising kids. And that idea actually came when we were first starting this project. Brad and I were having lunch together, and he brought up, well, what about a public service announcement campaign? And I kind of thought about it for a second. So, does that really work? And he looked at me and goes, you're in Texas. You've got the best public service announcement campaign in history. Don't mess with Texas. People buy T-shirts that say don't mess with Texas, and it's a public service campaign to get people to not litter, and it actually worked really well. We unpacked the data around that campaign. So if Texas can do that for littering, what do you think we can do for families if we're really going hard into educating Texans about the value of getting married and having kids? The other piece is incentivizing those decisions. We've got a program in Texas that the Health and Human Services Commission has called Together in Texas. And through this program, Texans can find premarital counseling resources. And if you do premarital counseling, you actually get your marriage license fee waived, you get the waiting period waived. Very, very few Texans are taking advantage of that. And it's partly because the entire program is just one website staffed by one person. Literally, you look at the budget, it's one full-time equivalent staff member that's responsible for promoting premarital education for families. And you compare that to a state like Utah that has a really impressive slate of programs around premarital education and getting people connected with podcasts, resources, getting them connected to counselors in their community who can help them lay the foundation of a strong and stable marriage. That investment in Utah has paid off dramatically for them in terms of increasing marriage rates in that state. And so leaning into that apparatus that we have in Texas, but we're not utilizing effectively at all, and making sure that we are giving Texans access to resources that will enable their marriages to succeed in the long term, I think is really critical for ensuring that the numbers that we already have in Texas are going up and buck the national trends and really make Texas a bastion of something that's quite frankly countercultural right now.
That's awesome. Guys, I do want to leave a little bit of time for questions. We do have two staffers who will be coming around to take y'all's questions. The briefer the question, the more wisdom from our panelists. Ms. Corwin.
Hi, thank you. I'm District 58, Cleburne, Burleson, and Glenrose. And our central appraisal district in Johnson County just capped or froze all appraisals for 3 years. So I have 8 superintendents that are very concerned about their budget. What would you suggest in communicating to them that the state will, of course, support them?
I think that's probably the property tax. Thank you, Helen. I mean, that's why we actually, push the elected CAD board members, first of all, that they're obviously going to be more responsive to their taxpayers and constituents when they can be voted out. Because we've all heard horror stories, and a lot of you experienced them, of being treated badly in, our meetings and when you're trying to protest your values. And it makes a difference when it's someone that's elected. But that's the property tax valuation study that I think you're talking about there. And so what that is where if there's a difference between the local value, which in this case would be capped, it sounds like, and what the comptroller says the value should be, because they run those numbers periodically. I think it's supposed to be every third year, but it ends up being every year for most because they're outside of the tolerance for error. But anyway, what we would need to do is increase the tolerance for error, essentially. And by doing that, what that means is the comptroller's numbers and values are not going to be forced onto the school district. Because the way it works right now is if they say, we're not raising values, and then the comptroller's numbers are, right now the tolerance for error is 5%, say 10% error, or 9%. They'll impute that higher value, which lowers the state funding, right? Because they'll say, well, we're going to deem this as your value, even though this is what you're levying the tax on right here, because you refused to raise the appraisal. So I've had a bill, and I've introduced it twice. I've gotten it halfway before, almost halfway past, that would increase that tolerance for error on the property tax valuation study. That would help that local decision on the values, right? And also not cause that situation where they could, have decreased state funding, essentially. So a little in the weeds there, but, that's I think an important tool, that, local control on the values. They can, they can. So we saw in Spring Branch where they're not going to pay the Robin Hood. Well, okay, I don't like Robin Hood, but when they don't, I guess, comply with the state law, the TA can come in there and sever value. In other words, they can come and take away property tax base. So they could. It kind of depends, I guess, on the situation there. So,
other questions? In the front. Oh.
Hey there. Nicole Neely. I'm the Executive Director of Texas Pregnancy Care Network. We're a pro-life nonprofit here in Texas that helps administer the Texas Thriving Families Program. And we've been tasked by the state to help promote marriage and family formation. Dr. Wilcox, in your book, you have a lot of worrying statistics about step families, especially for single mothers who bring another male into the home. Is there a way to promote marriage and family formation to a single mom if she doesn't have access to marry the biological father?
Great question. So I was raised by, a single mom, and as you probably know from the book, and, can appreciate kind of that dynamic and the way in which there are going to be plenty of families formed in that context where the child is being, raised by a mom and a stepfather. And I think what I would say in that context is just to encourage a single mom in that situation, as with young adults actually more generally, or middle-aged adults more generally, for instance, is just to kind of move slowly into their romantic relationships. And we do see in our culture today is a lot of people are kind of moving really quickly, into dating and, cohabitation and childbearing and whatnot. And it's just pretty clear from the evidence, including from Sharon Sassler at Cornell, for instance, that tempo matters in romantic relationships. And taking things slowly, getting to know one another, kind of having a strong and secure foundation for your relationship is really important to kind of forging a stable and secure and healthy marriage. And so I think that's particularly important for, single moms, single dads as well, who are, looking to remarry, and recognizing too that there's just more of a challenge, for them and for the new parent in the household, because, kids are more likely to find this newer person, kind of more challenging to relate to as someone who's not their biological parent. And I'm an adoptive father as well. And just kind of we can see, with our kids, that that's just a bit more challenging for, our own children than it is for, biological kids to have those two biological parents in the household. So.
Okay, first I'd like to thank EPF for hosting this program. And I want to offer an endorsement to Andrew, your proposal for the PSA regarding people getting married. A little background, I'll call it a part-time marriage advocate, having leading programs through our church, whatnot, through pre-marriage. That leads me to the second comment, which is the pre-marriage program you talk about is wonderful, but it needs to be worked on. It doesn't work very well. We've had a lot of people that have tried to come through it unsuccessfly. So I don't think your numbers are quite where they could be with a little attention. Secondly, Dr. Wilcox, your book points out that the rates of marriage among marrying age adults is at an all-time low, at least from record standpoint. What do you think has contributed to that decline in particular? Of course, in my view, I think there's a large component of culture war. And secondly, are there government solutions? What government solutions can really deal with that issue of culture war?
Yeah, these are all great questions. So, I think kind of the decline in marriage is sort of overdetermined. There's a lot kind of happening. I think we're seeing, for instance, economically, a lot of guys who are not college educated are not flourishing in today's economy for a variety of reasons. And that matters because it's still the case, even in 2024, that women are looking for guys who are, reliably employed. So that's part of the story, is that kind of economic trend with a lot of men who are, again, not college educated, not flourishing in today's economy. I think we're obviously living in a more secular society, and that's also, part of the story. In my book, I talk a lot about individualism and the way in which, I think that tends to undercut, the value and sort of the appeal of marriage. We're kind of moving away to some extent from a more familistic culture in this current context. And then from the public policy perspective, we've seen a lot of policies since the late 60s that have first penalized marriage for the poor and now are penalizing marriage among working class couples with kids, just sort of the way in which we have our means-tested programs set up today. So these are all kind of different factors that are, I think, making marriage both less appealing and in some ways less accessible for young adults in different ways for different sort of subgroups and different classes. So I think the challenge is figuring out how at least we can kind of get government not to penalize marriage, and that's more frankly a federal challenge, with things like Medicaid, for instance, but also recognizing, this is where things like school choice are so important, that there is an important role that government plays when it comes to the culture in terms of education. And too many of our public schools, and even private schools, I think, don't do a good job of kind of educating our kids about the value of marriage and the value of family. And so I think both through school choice, but also kind of pushing things like the success sequence, we can kind of hopefully create a cultural context where our kids and our teenagers are getting not some kind of rose-colored, portrait of marriage and family, because it's hard. I've been married 29 years. I've had ups and downs in our marriage, but a true portrait, and that is one that kind of tells our kids the truth about the way in which flourishing and meaning and solidarity and generally happiness are more likely to be found in living a life dedicated to family, rather than just kind of pursuing your own kind of self-interest.
Thank you so much. Guys, before we head out, I do want to remind you all to grab a copy of our new research from IFS and TPPF, and also that Dr. Wilcox will be signing copies of his book outside. Make sure and look for both of those. And can you join me in thanking all of our panelists?